Well, Americans are casting their ballots amid a backdrop of new voting laws in more than a dozen states that require voters to produce identifications before they are allowed to vote. VOA's Chris Simkins reports from Greensboro, North Carolina, on the history of these laws and the controversy surrounding them.
Voters in some 30 states are now required to produce a government-issued photo identification before being allowed to cast their ballot. More states have been requiring this since the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001.
There were some who said that this would be a way to be able to prevent people from illegally obtaining the right to vote, perhaps having terrorists have the right to vote. And so all of a sudden there was this discussion now about whether or not identification should be required.
But in states like North Carolina, which had a strict voter ID law since 2013, a court struck down the requirement earlier this year, saying it discriminated against African Americans. Some black voters say the law has racist intentions.
Suppress fear, intimidation, and not, what you're afraid of. What are you afraid of? Let people exercise the right and vote their choice.
But studies suggest a decade-old voter ID law in Georgia has had little impact on suppressing the vote.
One of the ironies of the voter identification law here in Georgia is that it has not had an adverse impact on African American voter turnout. So in fact, African American voter turnout has actually increased in Georgia since the passage of the voter ID laws.
Proponents of the strict voter ID requirements say they are designed to eliminate widespread voter fraud. But critics contend there's no evidence of widespread fraud. Independent voter Scott Herrick says it would be foolish to commit voter fraud because the penalties are severe.
And what's the payoff for it if I go and try to pretend I'm somebody else, and cast one ballot and risk, years of jail?
North Carolina political science professor Charles Prisby says voter fraud is not a problem.
There's different kinds of voter fraud. The one that almost never occurs is people coming down in person and trying to impersonate somebody else.
Political analysts say they'll be watching to see if voter ID laws have a negative impact on turnout among minority groups in this election, such as Asian Americans and Latino voters. Chris Simkins, VOA News, Greensboro, North Carolina.